Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stan Schoonover. I'm a member of the Midwest Advisory Committee, and on behalf of Richard Crane, the president of the Midwest Clinic, and all the members of the board of directors, welcome to this session, The Legends of the Big Ten. We're so happy you're here at Midwest this year, and particularly this session, I've been authorized to tell you that some of what you're going to hear in the next hour is actually true. It's a great treat to have people like this to listen to and to regale us with everything we're going to hear for the next hour. John Whitwell, Myron, Welch, Cramer, and our moderator, Gephart.
Good afternoon and welcome to this very special session sponsored by the Big Ten Band Directors Association. This is, of course, Legends of the Big Ten. My name again is Gephart. I serve as the Al G. Wright Chair of University Bands at Purdue University, and I'm the past president of the Big Ten Band Directors Association. And I will serve as the moderator for today's Legend discussion. This is a two-part series. The first part, of course, is being held today, and the second will be held next June 2014, featuring more of our emeritus faculty from within the Big Ten. I'm sure that you're aware that the Big Ten Conference has been an incredibly rich conference when it comes to music. Some of the finest schools of music in the world are right here in the Big Ten Conference. And of course, the only one institution in the Big Ten without a school of music is my home, and that's Purdue. Absolutely, there's still a whole lot of music going on at Purdue University, I can tell you that. Of course, the schools of music have also produced some of the finest band programs in the world, as is demonstrated by these three men who are seated before me. We know these band programs by their history. Of course, the early leaders, like names that come to mind are Ravelli and Ebbs, and McGinnis, Ben Cresciuto, Hinesley, Bejan, Painter, Dvorak, Pearsall, Falcone, just to name a few. And today we're pleased to welcome these three modern-day legends, including Director of Bands Emeritus from Michigan State University, John Whitwell, Director of Bands Emeritus from the University of Iowa, Myron Welch, and Director of Bands Emeritus from Indiana University, Cramer. Al G. Wright was scheduled to be here for today. He's the Director of Bands Emeritus from Purdue, but he made a decision at the last moment that he could not attend. So you'll find a handout many of you, I hope, received with notes from Al, sending his regrets, with a photo of the Big Ten Band Directors Association taken many, many years ago. And I don't want to even begin to go down through that list of the greats from the Big Ten, the Big Ten Band Directors Association, but there are many in that photo. And of course, we certainly acknowledge today that Al Wright truly is one of the legends of the Big Ten, and we are sorry he can't be with us. This is meant to be an open conversation with these three gentlemen. I'm going to ask some questions and steer the conversation a little bit, but as we go, I'm sure that the conversation will evolve, and you're going to learn all sorts of information about the Big Ten Conference and exactly why it has been one of the leading conferences for music making throughout our history. So I'm going to get right down to the question and answer session. First of all, I'd like to address the first question to Myron Welch. I'd like, Myron, if you would, please talk about what it means to be a Big Ten band director and follow in the footsteps of all the great legends that have come out of this conference.
Well, one day, this is working. Done. Okay, does that work?
He's not part of the technology of the year.
Okay. One day you get this telephone call and you realize you're going to be a Big Ten band director. What does that mean? Well, first of all, it's scary. Because Jay gave you a list of some of those people. I'd like to refine that list just a bit more. When you find out that you're following in the footsteps of these great leaders of music education in the past, William Ravelli at the University of Michigan, Leonard Falcone at Michigan State, Al Wright at Purdue, Don McGinnis at Ohio State University, Harry Bejan at Michigan State in Illinois, A.A. Harding and Mark Hinesley at the University of Illinois, Ray DeWark was in Wisconsin, Gerald Prescott, Frank Benprosciutto at Minnesota, Ron Gregory at Indiana, and then Fred Ebbs, who was at Iowa and then Indiana, Frank Pearsall, who was my predecessor at Iowa, and also Glenn Cliff Bainham and John Painter at Northwestern. Folks, these were really significant people, true legends. And you have to step into a job and take over after them. So you sit back and say, what did they do? How can I keep up that legend? And what do I have to do in order to make this thing happen? And you see that they were really involved with quality music making. They were interested in the betterment of bands across the country and all over. And that's what it means. You have this role and this task in front of you when you become a Big Ten band director. And it's a great role. It's a wonderful ride, and thanks so much for all those people who set that course for us.
Ray, what about you? Where were the icons, and who were the icons in the Big Ten when the first time you became aware of the Big Ten band directors?
I grew up on a very small community in Illinois. I grew up on a farm. All I knew was baling hay, combining oats, shucking corn, and feeding the pigs. And fortunately, I had a wonderful, wonderful band director who was a great inspiration and motivator. I'm not sure what I'd be doing today if it hadn't been for Don Zimmerman, who was a great teacher in our small school. At the time, I was fortunate enough as a freshman in high school to be able to go to the State Solo and Ensemble contest and play Arthur Pryor's Thoughts of Love. And my judge at that time was Ray DeWark. And that's the first I'd ever met him or even had seen Ray DeWark. I did know that he was director of bands at the University of Wisconsin, and I thought, what is Ray Cramer from Delo, Illinois, farm boy, doing playing for a Big Ten band director at the state contest? But I remember him being so supportive and so kind, and actually spoke to me after I played my solo. Basically, could you play better in tune? And anyway, but that was my first experience with meeting a Big Ten band director. I was fortunate enough to have some teachers at my high school and in my association with my private teachers who had experience graduating from Big Ten universities. I was able to go to the University of Illinois summer music camp one summer, and the guest conductor was not really a guest from Illinois, but it was Mark Hinesley. Coming from a small band in a small school and playing trombone, I thought, well, this should be really special. And it was great. And I just remember being enthralled by the sound that the band was getting. I was so excited by the wonderful musicianship of Mark Hinesley, playing some of his own transcriptions at the time, and as a junior in high school, that was very special. As I went to undergrad school, I had a graduate from the University of Iowa who was my band director. I also met during my senior year in college the director of bands at the time at Iowa, which is Fred Ebbs, and decided right then that on hearing the University of Iowa Symphonic Band that I wanted to play in that band. So I went to graduate school and was able to have that first experience. But all of a sudden, these icons became real people. And finding out that the musical integrity and the character and the vision that they had for music education and the fantastic inspirational and motivational enthusiasm that they had for their craft and for their art obviously played a big part in my role of wanting to teach and to be involved. I did have a goal when I started teaching, because early on in my teaching career in Iowa, I met John Painter. And somebody told me the story about John Painter becoming director of bands when he was 28 years old at Northwestern University. And I thought, this is impossible. And then I met John Painter, and I could see why it could have happened. And even though John was not a faculty member that I knew or studied with John, he was an inspiration for me to set a goal that at some point in my life I knew that if it was all possible, that I would like to be able to teach in a university situation. And it was through the inspiration of Fred Epps and John Painter and Ray DeVork and all the people in Hinckley that I'd met up at that time that helped me achieve that goal.
Dr. Whitwell, I'd like for you to talk briefly about your background and how you got to be a Big Ten director of bands and who your most influential teachers were.
Sure. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay. I was born in Tennessee, and my family moved to Michigan when I was 8 to downriver Detroit community of River Rouge. And fortunately, providentially, it had one of the great high school band traditions in the nation. Mac E. Carr was the conductor, and I saw Max Carr's band in the July 4th parade in 1951 when I was 8, and the band, the sonority, the glory of this marching band overwhelmed me. And I was disappointed in the fall of the 4th grade to find that I could not be in the band until I was in the 5th grade. So I took class piano after school and joined the elementary band in the 5th grade. Mr. Carr was not only my band director, but my private teacher. And he was from that generation, today I think we call them tyrant band conductors. I adored him. I was a little bit afraid. I was very respectful. And he went out of his way to create opportunities for me, as he did for all the students. And I remember between the 6th and 7th grade, when he came to me and he said, now I have this 2-week summer band and you've always taken part, I assume you're going to be there, and I want you to assist me in teaching the beginning trombone class. I was scared to death. Primarily because I did not want to disappoint him. But at the same time, I was exhilarated to think that he had enough confidence in me that he asked me to do that. That was such an exhilarating, positive experience, that 2 weeks, that I think that was I wanted to be a music educator moment. Or at least it became a possibility that I started to think about that. The other thing that Mr. Carr did is he brought Bill Bell, Leonard B. Smith, and an array of world-class artists into our band group, into our auditorium, to solo with us and do master classes. Also, Mr. Carr took us to the University of Michigan for concerts, Michigan State, and to both schools for band days. And when you see one of those great Big Ten bands coming out of the tunnel, you change. I remember thinking when I heard the Michigan band come out and play the M fanfare, this is what heaven's going to sound. It's going to be the Michigan band. Or sitting in the auditorium when the Toccata Fugue is played. And if you're an 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, my imagination could not comprehend what I was hearing. So I didn't set out to be a college band conductor. I never thought about that. I wanted to be a great middle school band director someday. And I had great opportunities. The other thing I remember about being in the state of Michigan at that time was that the Big Ten college band conductors, Leonard Falcone and William B. Ravelli, were joined at the hip with our band directors and with us. They judged our festivals, and they did clinics with us. We went to hear their bands. We were in the same endeavor, and it just meant a great deal. And those gentlemen continued to play a major role in my life throughout different steps. I taught 10 years in my first job, teaching 2 years beginners, the next 2 years with junior high, and then the next 6 with high school. and then another high school job in Ann Arbor, and then 2 smaller college jobs. And, you know, if you had told me in the first 25 years of my career that I would end up at Michigan State, 30 miles from where I started teaching beginners, it was not possible. But somehow it happened, and I'm deeply grateful. And I always felt like I wanted to try to play the role as best I could, that I had seen those mentors play. And to help in the public schools, that's important.
One of the great elements, I think, of the Big Ten has been the musical presence of all these band programs over the last 50 years. And I'd like for all 3 of you to please address this question. Define the musical presence of the Big Ten during the last 5 decades. And Ray, I'm going to let you start, and then we'll pass it on to Myron and John.
When I came out of undergraduate school, I had a great desire to be a fantastic composer. I had great interest in it, and I was actually accepted on a fellowship in composition to the University of Iowa. Within 6 weeks, I found out that Cramer had no talent in composition. I'd never make any money. But what that did, it instilled in me in my undergraduate work, and also when I went to the University of Iowa, that it was important to have enough confidence and vision to not only accept those works that were traditional and solid in our repertoire, but to infuse those with the new things that were coming out at the time. And I had a great balance of that, both in my undergraduate school and at the University of Iowa underneath Frederick C. Ebbs. Fred was perhaps one of the most visionary people I've ever met in my life. Not only did he have a great understanding of what went on prior, having won the last national band contest with his Hobart High School band, but also taking over the job of not Bowling Green, but in Berea, Ohio, and then the University of Iowa. But building a repertoire and building up the image of fine band composers of the time and exposing young directors like myself, as well as educators in the program, to what was available and the excitement of performing new music. But there was always a balance between the standard repertoire and the new repertoire. One of my great thrills was performing on my trombone in that band. And in the early years of the Midwest Clinic, when it was held in the Sherman House Hotel, there were a period of years where the College Band Directors National Association was held in conjunction with the Midwest Clinic. And in 1962, the University of Iowa Band was invited to perform at that convention. We worked very diligently to make that happen. And one of the pieces that was on the program was the United States premiere of the Florence Schmidt Dionysiacs. And we used the original instrumentation. We took 99 people to that performance and used all the instruments that it was called for in the original French publication. And as I looked as a trombone player sitting out in the front row were all of the icons that I've already been talked about. Ravelli, Falcone, Hinesley, right down the line. And of course, nobody had heard this piece really in the States. And the response that the band got from that piece and from the icons that we know and respect from our past led me to believe that you could combine the standard repertoire and the new repertoire, carefully balanced, carefully selected, in making very exciting programs that would sustain all the people that are going to listen, both from the education process as well as the audience. And that, to me, was a great inspiration all the way through.
Okay, Myron, why don't you talk about the musical presence of the Big Ten during the past 50 years?
Well, the musical presence of the Big Ten is one of the things that made it really special. As they were saying, there's certain people in our lives that affect us so deeply with this musical presence. And the musical presence that I felt as a youngster, you can imagine I was 15, 16, 17 years old. I played for Harry Beechin in the Castec Band. I was, of course, clarinetist in that band. And that's an experience that I'll just never, never forget at that early age. And then to go on to play for Leonard Falcone at Michigan State, and then again for Harry Beecham. And the musical presence of the groups is nothing says it quite like going to listen to Ravelli's concerts. I can remember sitting in Hill Auditorium and hearing the premiere of the Giannini Symphony up in that balcony. I didn't know what hit me. That was just so beautiful. And what they did, this musical presence of the Big Ten, they gave us a concept of sound, a concept of musicality, a set of standards. Here's somewhere we can reach for these goals right here. This is what you're supposed to do. And these were the icons. That was the musicality of the Big Ten, setting the standard of excellence.
John?
I would follow that up by saying that the Big Ten has always, in my sense, provided leadership to move forward, not stay in where they are. It's very simple in our profession to believe that where we are is where it should always be. And if you look at history, that it tells us that's not the case, that we must keep evolving and going forward. And I think the Big Ten has provided leadership, as have some other athletic conferences. I remember when the big symphony band was the model, which was the Albert Austin Hardy model of Illinois, which was the national contest model instrumentation, and there were band people and there were wind ensemble freaks. and you had to choose a camp. It's not that way anymore. Evolution continues to happen. And so I think you need to keep thinking about where are we going, where would we choose to go? Because we're in control of the profession. All of us are in control of our profession. So I think the wind ensemble, the fact that we now include chamber music as a regular part of our repertoire, I see that happening in that 50 years that we talked about Jay. I also see a blurring of the lines between the wind ensemble, orchestra, choir, jazz, or crossover efforts, more inclusive efforts. If I had stayed at Michigan State, I had asked the dean to provide a string quintet every other semester to the wind symphony. So I could do those chamber pieces where I needed the strings. Because they, when I asked them in the hallway, I felt like a used car salesman. They said, well, what does it pay? So I think that's where we're going, and I think that we're getting there exponentially faster. It's speeding up. I retired 8 years ago, and there's a whole new repertoire since I retired. It's not air for band anymore.
The next question I'd like to address first to Myron, and then the rest can chime in here. Myron, what has been the role of the Big Ten band director in developing public school music teachers, and particularly the leadership role taken in the development of graduate conducting programs?
I think Ray mentioned earlier about the music education aspect of the Big Ten band directors and getting out and working with the bands. This was very important for us to not only pay attention to the music ed classes, teach music ed classes, get out and work with the bands, but there's something that has happened within the last generation or so that's become very important, and that's that we now teach graduate conductors. Our predecessors so much didn't do that. And we've developed these wonderful programs for developing conductors. Before, everybody was a music education major. Now they're conducting majors, and we really specialize in teaching the literature, the old literature, the new literature, the basics of conducting, the artistry of conducting. And I think we've, as a whole, the Big Ten has been part of the leadership role of teaching, conducting, and making better conductors, better teachers. They're really important.
John, would you comment on that question as well?
I think there's, we've lost some ground, in my opinion, with directors of bands at major universities not being involved with music education. That somehow music education has become a separate department of people that aren't necessarily conductors. And so I think we've lost some of that. I remember major conductors saying, now when you get your band, when you get your high school band, when you get your middle school band, in rehearsal, every rehearsal was a music ed moment. And there was even some common literature between the very best high schools and the major university bands. We could play movements of in the symphony, and now high school bands play all of it, and so on. But the repertoire really has separated more and more all the time. And universities are more departmentalized more and more. And I think that's a loss.
I think that one of the things that's been most satisfying to observe in the last 20, 25 years is the artistry of the conductors and the young conductors that I see coming up through the various graduate programs and what they're doing. I think that has added tremendously to our profession and given us a level of experience and a level of outside observation that has taken our programs and our art to a different level. And I think that's a great compliment to all of you and all of you that are in those kind of programs today. I think, as a way of caution, I would say this, that while we've elevated our art, both in the kind of literature that we're performing, the kind of wonderful pieces that are being written for us by outstanding composers throughout the world today, and the great instruction that we're getting through the various graduate conducting programs, I think that the thing that always characterized for me, as I watched the icons that we're talking about working within the programs and in their bands in the past, was that they were great musicians, and there was a great aspect of continuous teaching involved. I think we have to be careful today that while we have become so much more refined and excellent in gesture and in the selection of material, whatever, that we can't ever lose sight of the fact that we are still teachers on the podium. And that there are times that what we do with the gesture can't always convey everything that we want musically, that there has to still be some teaching involved. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be cautious about. And I think that in doing so, that allows our ensembles to develop and to continue the outstanding traditions in the past of developing the best sounds, the best precision, the best musical concepts that we can. But I'm just so delighted with where the educational process has taken the artistry of our careers.
John, you talked earlier about the generations that you saw, where you saw university bands joined at the hip, I think was the phrase that you used, with bands in the public schools. So how do we ensure that this relationship continues on and on?
I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure I have too many answers. I think the cycle of the great universities, all universities, preparing great teachers who teach their students, and they send their best and brightest to the university to become teachers, performers, composers, therapists, etc. And the cycle is complete. When we break the cycle, education, preparing the very best public school teachers, then we are endangering ourselves. I think I can identify a concern, and I would just encourage all of you who are educators to continue, as Ray said, to not forget about teaching, and not forget about teaching not only this piece in the musical art, but teaching people how to teach, and giving them concepts of how to teach. I think we've never had better teachers than we have today. But I may have become one of the old guys, and I remember the good old days. And maybe it wasn't as good as I was. But that is a concern.
Myron and Ray, why don't you comment about that very topic as well? Go ahead, Myron.
Well, this is not just a Big Ten situation when you talk about music education. That's nationwide. And boy, if you see university teachers in your state who don't get out and work, have a talk with them, a friendly talk. You know, and encourage them to work through their state organizations, encourage them to get out, but I would encourage you as teachers to ask them to come out. Ask them to get involved with your program. Ask them for advice. Some of them have a lot of information to give, but they don't know that you want it. And I think there's so much, if you would approach people and say, help. There are people that can help.
I think what we have to be careful of, I'd like to take a quick poll right now. In the last 3 months, how many in this audience has taken multiple students from your band program to observe a live concert of one of the great university bands? Would you just raise your hand in the last 3 months you've done that? Look around. Hardly any hands. Now, I can tell you honestly that we're living in a fantastic digital age. And I'm amazed at how many students I do an honor band or an all-state I will go to do, and the students have already downloaded the tunes to listen to on either YouTube or iPad or iTunes or whatever. And I think that's great. And I know that directors do the same thing. And they get a recording, they go to YouTube, whatever. When I was teaching in public school in Iowa, I made it a practice to take students to live concerts. I don't care how good the recording is. You set young students down in front of an outstanding band concert or an orchestra concert, they come away a different person. And if we don't take the effort to do that, then we're losing a very, very significant teaching tool. When I was teaching in Harlan, Iowa, which is way out in the southwest corner of Iowa, I actually got a chauffeur's license so I could drive a bus for 2 reasons. Number one, the practice field for marching band was away from the school, and I had to bus the kids at 7:30 every morning over to the practice field. The other reason I did that is because I would load up a busload of kids and drive them in all the way across the state of Iowa to Iowa City to hear the University of Iowa Symphonic Band. Many of those kids came back. I want to play in that band. I want to continue in music. I want to be a band director. If I would have played a recording of that band in the band room, I guarantee you that it would not have had the same impact. I want to encourage you that part of the education and the joining of the hip is taking your students to hear great concerts live. There's nothing like it. When I was teaching in Ohio, my school was fortunate enough to have a program where the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra under George Zell gave 4 concerts a year in my high school auditorium. And my students would observe the rehearsal and observe the concert, and Cramer received an education degree at the highest level. To watch George Zell work with the finest musicians in the world and what his expectations were for the musicianship from those people. And I know my students were turned off, and there was a large percentage of those students that went on into music because of the inspiration they received from the Cleveland Orchestra, from the Baldwin Wallace Conservatory of Music, hearing that band, the Orwoodland Conservatory, hearing live performances, and of course Don McGinnis with the Ohio State Band in Columbus.
going to change the topic just a little bit. We're looking at three masters here, three masters of programming for their ensembles. And I want to talk a little bit about literature selection, especially for a diverse band program. How, and working in the Big Ten, did you program for a band that included a whole variety of ensembles, including undergraduate music education majors, graduate performance majors, graduate conducting majors, and so forth? Myron, would you take that question first, please?
Well, this is a big task, and if you think it's easy working in a Big Ten school, it's not. It's like, your jobs are very difficult no matter where you are, and it's a big job. And you look at the number of groups that so many of us have in our ensembles, and we're dealing with non-major bands, we're dealing with undergraduate bands, we're dealing with graduate bands, we're dealing with chamber ensembles, marching band, everything else. And how to program for that is a real big issue for us. And it's basically, we have to make sure, again, education-wise, that every student who comes through our programs has this basic literature. You know, we can't do everything new and expect everybody to come out of school knowing everything. We've got to take these younger people and feed them this basic literature and like a curriculum and make sure it gets done. And then the older students have to have the newer literature. And then you get all these graduate students. They've been through a lot of this literature. They need a lot of new literature just to, you know, get them prepared for what they're going to do in the future. But it's a big job, and it's continually learning and keeping track of what you've played and recycling things that need to be recycled. Once you get people coming through and you play a work, and then 10 years later, you never repeated the work, and several generations of students have gone out of the university. I had a doctoral student come up the other day, at my retirement concert, said, that's the first time I've ever played the whole suite. I couldn't believe it. Here's somebody from Virginia who played first chair in the Virginia All-State Band, who was from a great program, and never played the whole suite. So we just have to be very careful and make sure that everybody learns the literature.
John, would you talk a little bit about the importance in programming of commissioning and where that really, what role that played in your career?
Well, I think I was growing up at the end of the large symphonic band era, in the beginning of the wind ensemble era. And having grown up more in the large symphonic band, that's sort of who I was. The wind ensemble did not have a presence in my experience. When I began to teach at the university level, I started to think about more what do I need to provide my students and where are we going? And I started to try to gain a sense of history, looking back, how did we get here, where are we going now? And I brought We Be Rebelling to Abilene Christian in 1983. And I said, at the end of this week, with my students, when I'm taking you back to the airport, I want you to tell me about what you think I'm doing. Give me some help. And he did. He was never reluctant to offer. He was very kind. And some of you will not believe half of this answer, but I promise you it's exactly what he said. First thing he said was, I looked at all your programs and you have a nice array of guest conductors and guest artists to perform. I don't see enough composers, major composers, and that scared me to death because we weren't ready in my estimation. He said, you and your students will grow the most in interaction with a great composer. You will feel very vulnerable, but that's when you grow the most. And the second thing he said, this was in 1983, he retired in 71. He said the wind ensemble is where we're going. He didn't say, I liked it. He said he had 12 years in retirement to look at this. He said, the wind ensemble is where we're going. Get on board. And it was like he hit me in the face with a 2 by 4. But I think the commissioning of new music and the interaction with composers at all teaching levels is fantastic. There's nothing more that we could do that's any better than that. It's the balance of issues. In every piece we do on every concert piece at a premiere, then it's unbalanced. If it doesn't include the whole suites and Granger and Bach transcriptions, our diet is who we become. And so if we want to create great musicians, they have to play Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, contemporary, chamber music, and bands need to play marches. We don't. We're losing the art of playing a traditional march. And a lot of our students from the universities are going to get an opportunity to play in the Marine Band or the Army. And they may not get that job because they don't know how to read a march. So I think it's a matter of balance. I always felt like if the audience leaves my concert and they loved every piece, I probably missed them. If they hated every piece, I knew I missed them all. But if they liked most of the music and said, I don't think I want to hear that again. Or maybe I do want to hear it again because I didn't get it. That's a pretty good place to be. I think that's balance.
I just have to add that, my wife is very perceptive. She's gone to lots of concerts over the years. And even though she said she's not a musician, she probably has a pretty good understanding of what's going on the stage. But during some of my years in Indiana, she would always ask me the day before the program, well, Ray, what am I not going to like on the program? But I think it's important that we do include a balance. And I just want to add to what you just said about starting in an era with the large symphonic band. I had the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, I actually started with a wind ensemble. It wasn't intended. And it was at a very small school in Illinois, and I only had 16 students in band. But that was out of a high school of 53, the total enrollment. But I didn't have any clarinets. So that's when I had 5 drummers, though, out of the 16. That's when I first learned how to arrange for band, substituting clarinet parts for snare drums. Never mind. But I think, John, you're absolutely right in the fact that that there has to be a terrific balance in what we do, and having the students involved in experiencing the various periods and dynamics of the kind of literature that's available to us.
This question is for all three. What do you think has changed the most in your respective institutions, in your schools of music, in the Big Ten since you first became involved? Myron, why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, one of the big things we've seen over the years is the growth in the number of really outstanding university band programs throughout the country. Where it was started out with just a handful of them. Now there are great groups all over the country. And the thing that we've seen, and part of it's with this commissioning projects that we've done, so music has become a lot more difficult. And this commissioning is a wonderful growth experience for the conductors. It's a wonderful growth experience for the players to be able to take something new and bring it alive. It's wonderful, and this has changed. And The other thing that I think has changed a great deal, and it's continued a lot, but it's come across, is great camaraderie. There's a great camaraderie. We're friendlier now than we used to be. You know, and if you haven't noticed in your groups with the conductors and the teachers, this wasn't always the case. But I think the Big Ten is a real example of a wonderful group of friends. We don't compete so much, we support. We support one another. And it's something that you need to do in your conferences in the high school and the junior high and everything else, is help one another. And we're here to help, and we're here to get help too.
What was the question? I agree, Myron, that there has been a great camaraderie and a support for one another throughout. I can honestly say that I was young when I came into the Big Ten, not as a director of bands, but as an assistant director of bands. And I can't recall a time that I didn't go to any of the people that were already directors of bands or people that were some of the icons that were still working their profession when I was there, that you couldn't go to them and ask a question and their opinion on something, and you would get a direct, honest answer. They wouldn't blow you off. They would take time to answer your question and speak with you, anything to help you grow and to build your own career and in your own experience in your own school. I think that's been terrific. I think that there's no real place for the kind of competition that exists sometimes between schools and associations at the musical level. I think our competition is the music itself. And the more that we can do to help one another to establish the best rapport with the music and the understanding of the music, then the better off we're all going to be as musicians.
John, would you like to comment on that particular question? What's changed the most since your involvement within the Big Ten?
I think the major schools of music are becoming more comprehensive, offering more degree programs. I remember, and I'm sure it was not unusual, but at Michigan, even the saxophone, I think the entry of Larry Teal as a saxophone teacher adjunct was difficult to achieve because the saxophone was not a classical real instrument in everyone's eyes. And I remember Dr. Ravelli talking about that. And I also remember Dr. Ravelli talking about to saxophone players, you can't use that mouthpiece of monologues. And there was not a jazz program at Michigan during this time. And I think we're much more comprehensive and remedial, and there's greater depth. I think at certain times, and it may be that way in your part of the country, the band conductors don't want the orchestra to get too good. And we create our own fears, our own insecurities. And I just sense that we're in a much happier place and a more remedial place than we've ever been.
Before we run out of time today, I want to just let you reflect on what some of your fondest memories are of working within the Big Ten, what some of the highlights were of your time in the Big Ten. Ray, why don't you start with that question?
That's a difficult question because, you know, I spent 36 years at Indiana University, and there's a lot of opportunities and experiences that occurred during that time that stick in my mind as being wonderful highlights and benchmarks of my experience there. But I think for myself and maybe my colleagues, the one thing I want to make absolutely clear to everybody here is that for us seated here and the icons that you see in this picture right here, for all of us that have been involved in Big Ten, none of the things could have been accomplished. None of the goals could have been achieved without fantastic students to work with. And I know for myself that I've always been extremely appreciative of the kind of students that I was able to work with in Indiana over the years. And my mentor, Fred Ebbs, used to say you know, you can't have a zoo without animals. And we had lots of animals over the years that played some fantastic games. And I think that I just want to make that point very clear, that whatever we wanted to achieve, or whatever our goals were, musically or experientially as a career, none of that could happen. Even at your levels, with your high school groups, your middle school groups, whatever, nothing happens without that individual person that's filling that chair that is going to make a difference in your experience and their experience. It's always a collaboration between the student and the podium. And without that collaboration, none of those great experiences will ever happen.
Well, when you look back at the career in the Big Ten, of course, what sticks out are the major performances, the great things that you're able to do with the new commissions and the new works and conventions you play. But nothing sticks out more than the accomplishments of your students. There's one thing to look back on with great heartfelt warmth. It's what students have come through your program that you can watch them grow and see what they produce. It's our students, and that's where we live in the lives of our students that we've taught.
I would certainly agree with all of that, and I would only add being mentored, even as a member of the Big Ten. I was never a student of Harry Regents, but he was a mentor to me. And that sense of family continuity. I think the opportunities that I had to interact with composers and artists, faculty members that would play in shadows with us, and I was able to work with their students. Was something that I could never have imagined possible as a young teacher. The opportunities to make music with the best and the brightest young people, and to continue to grow. All of us in our profession are given in the gene pool and by our teachers a desire to continue to grow. And in our profession, we can do that. Because just when you think you've played every great piece, there are 10 more written the rest of it. As a bonus, I never played a measure of 3/8, 5/8, 7/8 in my life. I remember when the Bob Jager Third Suite came on, and everybody was saying, "How do you conduct that second?"
How do you conduct that little job?
I mean, let alone Schwander in 11/16 and think that, so I was always rhythmically challenged. and to continue to grow, but to have the opportunity to do that is beyond anything that we hope for. And ours is a great journey. A great journey.
Like Myron, we all remember performances, specific performances that stand out in our minds. But I think one of the things that is all of our considerations is that, like me, I wanted to be like someone who I was inspired by. I wanted to reproduce them in me or through me. And I think for us, that's what we want to do. That's what I want to do. We all want to recreate ourselves. And to see students actually become a director, a teacher, a performer, through what they gain through your ensemble experience, to me is one of the great satisfactions of our profession.
Okay. I think being a teacher at all levels is just right below being a parent. In life, we live vicariously through our children, and we want to see them do well, to be good people, to succeed, and it's the same thing for our students. you're my student and you succeed, I succeed. It's a beautiful thing because the older we get, the more we get to see those people succeed. It's very precious.
You know, there's something that I think all of us share, and that's the thankfulness for being able to be a Big Ten band director. You know, none of us planned on this. It just, somehow, we happened to be in the right place at the right time and did the right thing somehow. We don't know what that is, what it was, but it happened. And we had no idea that we were going to be able to make music at this level. But just keep at it, and it's there. And it's been a wonderful ride, and something that we could have never planned on doing this. And what a great experience to make music at all levels, and particularly at this level.
I would agree with that, and I just want to add before we wrap up with our last question, the significance of not only looking at our any music students that you happen to teach, but all students. I have the opportunity to work with engineers and scientists and mathematicians and so forth at Purdue, and I can take great pride in the fact that my students succeed as astronauts, as chemical engineers and so forth. And so, you know, it's with every student we work with, whether they go on into a music career or not. I think it's significant to look at that and realize we all have a great impact on every life that we come into contact with, whether it be a prospective music student or a music major or whatever. I think that's important to remember.
You know, you mentioned earlier that they didn't have a music school at Purdue University, which they've never had. But how many college band directors out there have over 850 students in your band program?
Well, thank you. And honestly, how many of you, when you look at the number of students going on to major in music, the vast majority of your students will not. And so I think it's a great testimony, and we all have had opportunities to work with the non-majors, and I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. The last thing I'd like to do before I close our session is I want to acknowledge, first of all, these three gentlemen and thank them for being here today. This has been a great Myron said to me before the session is, don't you have to be dead to be a legend? And of course, we all know that's absolutely not true. These three gentlemen are legends. I want to also acknowledge the fact that with us here today is Gladys Wright, the wife of Director of Bands Emeritus Al Wright. I'd like for you to please give her a warm welcome. At this time, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Seditol and his Michigan State Ensemble last night for a great concert. And finally, I'd like to please ask my colleagues in the Big Ten, those of you who are currently working in the Big Ten Conference in the band and band programs across the conference, would you please stand and let us congratulate you for what you do at any level, the band directors in the Big Ten, would you please stand? And we're just about right on time. I want to thank you for being at our session. Please stay tuned for part 2 of Legends of the Big Ten in 2014. Have a great evening.